Well, welcome back to Wall Street Green Digital. I'm David Kirkpatrick, and our next speaker is Charles Oppenheimer, who was the founder of the Oppenheimer Project, a fantastically interesting project. He is an Oppenheimer, and his nonprofit is devoted to international cooperation towards a safe future, and much of his work has turned out in recent years to be about nuclear power. So, Charles, welcome. It's great to have you here. And I'm very eager to hear you explain, a little bit about your organization and how you got to this focus on nuclear power. Maybe you could just start and give us a little background.
Sure. Well, I started the Oppenheimer Project. It was kind of sparked by the U.S. Department of Energy, who reached out to the family and asked for permission to use the family name. And that was back under the end of Obama administration. And it kind of sparked an idea in my head. Why doesn't our family have our own representation of Robert Oppenheimer's values? It was very much not in the family culture to do that. Neither my grandfather or my father would have done that. But I'm more of a public person and thought that really it was worth talking about my grandfather's values. So that kind of started the journey. As the years developed, and the main intention is to talk about my grandfather's values, what the significance of bringing fission into the world, what it can mean, and what we could do with it. And that ended up causing me to look a lot more closely at nuclear power, which I had a vaguely negative view of it being associated with nuclear weapons initially.
So it's a logical scientific connection to your grandfather's work, but you changed your view on nuclear fission power as for power. So tell us why. What have you learned in this journey that sort of opened your eyes and changed your thinking?
Yes. I, like most people, I had a family view of nuclear energy that is something that we should try our hardest not to use for weapons, and that it could be a peace builder in the world. So that's a particular Oppenheimer view. But the rest of my knowledge was really absorbed through popular culture, I realized. I knew that nuclear power energy was deadly. It could explode. It could kill people. The waste was a terrible problem. Those were all perceptions I had just absorbed through very surface level media. And when I started thinking about the seriousness of climate change and the need for like energy abundance instead of just meeting our needs, I thought, well, what is the deal with nuclear energy? Could we scale it to the point where it would really actually solve our global problems instead of having a Band-Aid on it? And so when I looked into it, I was really pretty shocked at the discrepancy between my perception of what nuclear power was and the reality. And the most primary thing is it safe or is it dangerous? And there's a very clear, measurable scientific consensus about that it's an extremely safe power source. And the public perception pervade mainly through media stories is that it's incredibly dangerous. And so that gap just kind of radicalized me and started looking at it and seeing what I could do to contribute, getting that word out, basically.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you're working on now. I want to come back to the safety question in a minute, but talk a little bit about where we stand in the deployment of nuclear, which you're now such an active proponent on, and what you'd like to see happen going forward.
Yeah, well, it turns out the main blocker for nuclear power projects in the US and most of the world have been primarily financial. That's derivative of some distaste in the public, believing that it's unsafe and kind of a cycle of engineering and regulation that makes it more expensive. But it's effectively ultimately becomes a decision on a financial reason. Are we going to invest in this power source and get more money than we put in? And starting in the actually late 70s, it turned out that the cost of producing nuclear power and the production construction productivity was going down, and utilities in the US started canceling orders, believing that if they invested in a project, they wouldn't get their money back. And that effectively got worse and worse over the years. And so I've looked at the situation where just recently there's an extremely broad consensus of climate organizations, scientific labs, and global global consensus that we cannot get to net zero without nuclear energy. And the answer to solve that turns out is not just a need for new science, new technology, but how can we solve those financial problems, those blockers that stop projects? How can we make it economically viable to invest in a project or a system really of nuclear power?
And you believe it is economically viable, and it may be one of the fastest ways we could get to some of our goals, or at least approach them.
Yeah, I mean, it has this proven thing that at a system level, it's known that if we invest at a large system level, like let's say the country of France invested in 50 to 60 nuclear reactors effectively at the same time in a 10-year period. If you do it at that scale, it's a guaranteed path to decarbonization. Where you build the same reactor, you have the same crew learning things, cycling into the next cycle, and it requires, or it's best suited to that large of a system view. And you can look at the outcome of France, which has the cleanest and cheapest energy in Europe, and a direct comparison is what Germany did, which had some great nuclear reactors, but invested 20 years and far, far more money in variable renewable expansion. And they've ended up after 20 years with producing more carbon energy than ever. And, there's been some good benefits of their renewable investment. But I think the consensus is that if you expand nuclear energy, it will make renewables cheaper. And if you try to get to 100% carbon-free energy without the power of nuclear energy, it would be really dumb. It's like it's a bad system bet. Yeah.
Wait, so why will more nuclear make renewables cheaper? Explain that.
There's a exponential curve. Renewables are great for a cheap variable deployment, but as we know, we use electricity 24 hours a day. And so what happens when you try to get to 100% coverage of electricity power with variable sources, you get an exponential cost curve and exponential land use and exponential mining for creating batteries to store things. And if you just look at a system cost of that, not only would that cost in capital cost to get up to 100%, but all of those systems don't have the durability of a nuclear power plant. So you would spend that much more and then redo it every 10 years or 20 years. And if you look at that over 80 years, there's actually no cost. So if you take out that last 20 to 30% that you need for a clean, firm baseload to run an electricity grid, you're much better in investing in nuclear energy with renewables.
Well, I believe so. Germany pulled back very much from their nuclear commitment. Japan has been very unenthusiastic since Fukushima. And I almost sort of feel we're seeing a little theme here. I don't know if you heard Tito Jankowski's talk about carbon capture a minute ago, but, carbon capture is said by some environmentalists to be an unsavory corporate scheme. We know that, which I don't think it is, by the way, at all. And I think his work is great. But we know that nuclear still has, even though the mood is shifting, there's a lot of resistance, a lot of people who feel they're too scared of it. It's too expensive. It's connected to weapons even still, and maybe we can get to that. But what you're telling us, and Tito combined with you, is that really the only way we're going to meet our climate goals is if we get over some of our preconceptions and our prejudices and really start investing in what we know works. And this is what you've concluded nuclear represents.
That's right. And fission in particular is a very well-known quantity. There's no doubt that it could get us to energy abundance. And I think that's another thing, a preconceived notion that I had as a environmentalists generally, is we should use less resources and less energy and everybody conserve a little more. Well, I think the data is out and the proof is in the pudding. Our carbon went straight up in a line. Our energy use went straight up on a line, and you have half the world who doesn't have anywhere near the amount of energy they need. So we just fundamentally need as much energy as we can get. And if we want it to be carbon free, nuclear is the one that can deliver today, and we can just make the decision to do it and promote things or enable things like a direct air capture that Tito promotes. You need a really abundant carbon-free energy source, or you can't do that. I mean, it works with it. Yeah, so that's a good example.
But the reality in the United States is that we really don't have the ecosystem we need because we've sort of let it fester, right? I mean, we really haven't. We built one big nuclear plant recently in Georgia that was put online. There's a couple of others under construction, but we don't have the scale of deployment that you seem to be advocating before.
Right. And that is the situation in the US. The government has been extremely supportive, creating very valuable tax incentives, a loan program authority with over $300 billion. But what we don't have is a government system that could just pull the trigger and say, we're building 100 nuclear plants. That's not how we do things in the US. We're government enabled, private led. So we need companies to step up and say, we're taking the risk, we're taking the challenge. And I've, developed that method that even with a large system change, you could complain about how we should build 100 of them, but you could also start by building one. You could go from 0 to 1 and get a single project started, catalyzed, and that could create a chain reaction, so to speak, of other builders. And it looks like that's what's happening. There's unprecedented interest in nuclear energy right now. New news coming out every day, Google and Kairos yesterday, Microsoft and Constellation earlier, and it looks like it's right about to happen. And so it's kind of an exciting time to unlock that.
Well, that's an optimistic interpretation, but it is true. And one of our audience questions came in a little while ago about the Kairos deal with Google. Talk a little bit about the significance of that in this sort of new emerging kind of merging of AI and data centers with nuclear, which is many people's view going to really significantly change the equation for nuclear construction and use in the United States. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest trends because nuclear on its face, when you produce a full project, the amount of dollars that you can sell that electricity for is often above the market rate. And the upfront capital cost is inherently higher with a nuclear project, not even to mention the regulations. So how can you justify that? In a pure capitalist system, you say, I can make more money shorter by putting up a solar array, but that is not what the system needs. The system must have firm, clean, carbon-free 24/7 coverage.
Data centers and AI in particular.
In particular, but in general, the electricity grid does not perform. It cannot perform without a 24/7, at least 25 to 35%. They were designed for that. And so how can you bridge that gap between what the market will pay purely for commercial reasons and what these tech companies with their kind of leftist leanings, they believe in decarbonization. They truly believe that. They want to have a decarbonized world. They want to use their resources to support that, but they're also a business. And nuclear is a way that they can do that. They can say, we will pay more for energy that's 24/7 carbon-free of the form of nuclear, but we're just begging you, industry, to create it for us. And that's what they've been saying to utilities and vendors. They don't want to be full power plants, but they really want this electricity. And the two deals that recently came about are symptomatic of that. The Microsoft and Constellation one, which we know more about because it's been out longer, where there's published analysis. It's not a proven insider thing, but broad consensus that they're paying $100 to $120 a megawatt hour. And you take any nuclear.
This is a 3 Mile Island for powering of data center by Microsoft. Yeah.
Yes. Constellation is a utility, Microsoft, and 3 Mile Island, the most symbolic place that you could restart a nuclear power plant, was decided to be restarted, not with backlash or protest, but people saying the only environmental protest is, hey, how come you're using all that power for a data center? It should go to everybody. That's a great attitude about nuclear power. It should go to everybody. And the fact that Microsoft will step up and say that they'll pay in advance more than they would have to for this energy sends a market signal. And then you see, Google's situation of wanting to catch up. We want to be in the nuclear business. We want to have a deal announced. And Kairos is one of the best vendors out there of advanced nuclear energy system. It's not a fully licensed system, but they're one of the furthest along. So
explain what they just announced. Would you just define?
So Google announced that they are buying in a PPA, so an agreement to purchase power from Kairos production by 2035 up to 500 megawatts. There's probably more substantive details that literally came out yesterday, but that's a strong signal to the market that Google is buying nuclear power. They're not using a framework or abstract stuff. We are supporting the buying of it. And then that enables a company like Kairos to say, I've got a major customer here willing to take this power. Who wants to invest in it? And that's a very advanced nuclear system, the Kairos one, a molten salt reactor, which is not licensed yet. And so Google willing to invest in this future pipeline of reactors is positive. But there's also a big trend for large existing reactors.
So basically what that means is we'll start seeing reactors being built specifically to power data centers. And that's what they've just announced in effect. Yeah.
Yes, but it also, I think, will that and the Microsoft dollars makes any nuclear power plant project on a spreadsheet now work out. If somebody's willing to pay $100 a megawatt hour and that becomes the floor price for nuclear power, you can start investing in these projects with reasonable expectation of a return.
Right. Well, now the one big plant that was built recently, Vogtle in Georgia, I believe it was $35 billion. And that's something that has to come down. I'm setting up a larger question about China. I believe you're the one that told me that 27 nuclear plants are under construction in China right now, which is obviously something to cheer about. Not that we cheer about China very much, but when it comes to green technologies, I think it begins to be quite a contrast with what we're doing. So they have made this national commitment to do what you're saying. Presumably they're building the sort of muscle memory to build these faster and cheaper with more trained people, et cetera, which we need to do. Are you thinking of it that way?
Yes, it's good for them to build more nuclear. The carbon problem is shared globally, so any amount of power they do to reduce carbon from nuclear power is good. They have also proven with the same designs, they build AP1000s in part and have gotten down to a quarter of the price that we built Vogtle. So there's nothing theoretically impossible in large scale nuclear scales. We need a lot of power. We need it at large scale. And we in the US could do well to learn from kind of Chinese national strategy. We could have more national security policy view on really needing to expand at a large level the amount of nuclear power we have.
Okay, well, I think a lot of people are probably surprised to hear you, a self-proclaimed environmentalist and person who believes in peace and all the good things, being such a strong proponent of fission. We didn't even talk about fusion. I know you think it's not a bad thing to pursue, but that we've got proven capacity in fission, just like a 10-second response. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, we should continue with basic science with fusion, make it happen, and invest in what we know works now. It's the most practical route as a peace builder, as a symbol, like 3 Mile Island. Let's turn fission into something as a worldwide symbol of peace.
Well, I think your talk and this change in mood is a very major development in the climate economy. So thank you for explaining the importance of fission going forward, and keep up the good work, Charles, and enjoyed having you here at Wall Street Green Digital. So we're going to be back in just a minute with Jacqueline Francis, who was postponed earlier. See you there. Thanks again to Charles Oppenheimer.
Thanks, David.